White Buffalo Rebuild Part 2. Fueled by, maybe they'll sponsor me someday, but probably not. Okay, so right off the bat, we're going to be putting the front shocks on, then the tires. First, I'm going to sweep so that you think that I actually cleaned. Then I can put it back on the ground. Then the front end will be back together. And once we got the front end back together, then I believe we're going to start working on the rear end, maybe pulling that axle out first, because that's probably, it might fight me, maybe not, maybe it won't, we'll see. But I think that's the game plan for this morning. Here are my tips for installing the shock. And please take everything I say with a grain of salt, because I am a semi-amateur mechanic. Most of the time I don't know what I'm doing. So just hear me out. So I already got one side of the shock, one side installed. I'm going to install this side. So I work on things most by myself. I've come to realize if you don't have a front sway bar, it's a lot easier to install the shocks. I always put the upper bolt first because that's a lot easier to put in, and then I can manhandle this in or use a jack to get this all to line up. But if you do have a front sway bar, just disconnect it because it's going to be a lot easier to move the A-arm, the suspension pretty much, because if it is hooked up, when you go to try to move this side, it's going to try to move that side as well. So if you're just trying to install like a shock or whatever you're doing, just maybe disconnect the sway bar first. It may make your life easier. That's just what I found. But yeah, so by doing that, I can just grab, ooh, that's kind of sketchy, underneath the rotor, and then wiggle this back and forth until I can get that bolt through, and then it's ready. So then we just grab our impact, which this is a 17 mil. All your suspension points on the front end should be 17 mil. So I just impact away. So yeah, and then at this point, if I had a sway bar, I would hook it back up using the jack to move it to get it into place, because once you have your suspension in there, it's pretty hard to get it to move. So that's my tip for installing the front suspension. So the reason I said that was sketchy, I just realized my jack is not very well placed, and when I lifted up on that bottom A-arm, the whole car moved. So yeah, I'm going to be glad to take it off the jack, finally put it on the front tires. So everything will quit moving, and then we'll be able to move on to the rear. So I'm going to do a product highlight here. So this is a grill from Razor Edge Designs. And this is the factory grill for the Kawasaki KRX. So this is the, well, it probably won't even fit in here because of my bumper and winch setup. But, so I had a factory grill in here for a couple of weeks until it popped out and fell out. If you take any sort of impact or even quite a bit of debris, you can actually knock this loose and it will legitimately just fall out. And I think I lost my factory one pretty quickly while racing. This one, I must have ordered it as a replacement because I don't know why I still have it. But as you can tell, this thing's taken a lot of hits. And I've had this grill in here ever since. I mean, I've broke that and it still sits solid and true. I mean, this thing's just all sorts of loose. But one thing to highlight is the tangs on the bottom, I guess that's what I would call them, are much longer than the factory ones. And so by having those sit in here farther, and this is kind of harder to put in, but it's much more solid. Let's see if we can do this one-handed. hold on. Sorry, I couldn't put it in one-handed. So it is a much snugger and tighter fit, but this thing has been like destroyed with mud and debris and stuff like that. And it'll protect your radiator a lot more because of how small the holes are. Higher chance of it getting plugged up, but I think it's definitely worth it just because of how much it's going to protect it. But I mean, you can see like how well that is in there. And so if you don't want to keep losing your grill, I would definitely recommend getting a Razor Edge Designs grill. I got the doors on, or one door, still gotta do that one. There's a pretty bad gap, so, which I'm not really too worried about because I need to adjust it all, but I need to put all the new fenders on because this one's broken and it's broken back here. Those tabs are bent back there. I've actually ripped this fender off like 3 times, but so I'm not super worried about the fitment. At least it opens and closes right now. I did install the Brute Performance bushing kit, which is going to be kind of hard to see. I don't know if you can really see it, but really just helps how easy it is. On the pins, much better quality than factory. But yeah, I'm going to get the other side mounted up, and then we should be able to move on to, I think, the axle and the transmission mount I'm going to work on. Then maybe the motor. I am going to be taking my steering quickener out of this because I have a 2-to-1 steering quickener. I have all the factory steering. I just can't remember where I put it, so I got to find that. Then I'm going to put that all back in. And then I think the interior should be wrapped up after that. Once we get the factory steering back in it. But the front end's all together, sitting on the ground. Even got the hood in. I'm gonna it's on 30s right now, which is the Sedona Sano wheels, the 15x6, which is a 5x1 offset, which those wheels have been great for me. I've had really no issues with them. But I think I'm going to put it on either a 33 or a 35. I've been running the 33-inch Sedona ridge saws, and those have been great on the other race car, so we might put that on there. Did realize that these shocks, which are some takeoffs off of a machine we parted out, have the tender springs already on them. So I think we're definitely going to need to go up, which is going to be a nice upgrade. About all I really got left is to install the motor, which, yeah. First, I'm going to get that axle out. Bad news is I'm not going to be able to pull it the normal way of just pulling the axle out. I'm going to have to probably get some pry bars behind it. May have to get a slide hammer and clamp onto that somehow to get it to pop. We'll deal with that as it comes. I'm going to get the new transmission bushing installed. I wish that it wasn't 10 degrees outside and freezing like it is. I don't know if you can see that. Ew, I clean my windows. But it's like frozen outside, because then I could take this outside and power wash it. But that's just not a possibility at this time. So I'm going to do the best we can. Nice thing is, I have no idea where most of this plugs into. This isn't my first time doing this, but you just figure it out as you go, because it really can only lay one way in here. And so we'll see how that goes. We'll drop the motor in, then put it in, bolt it up here, lift it up, put the motor mount up here, bolt that in, and then should just be reassembly time. So shouldn't be terrible. We'll probably start with this axle first and the transmission bushing, because Kawasaki I don't know why they did this, but this side is removable. So you can remove this, swap your new bushing in, no problem. This side is welded in. Not sure why, but since this is welded in, we're gonna have to get the transmission cockeyed to be able to put this bushing in. So maybe a blessing in disguise that I gotta pull that axle, because I don't know if I would have been able to do that with this axle still in it. We'll see. I'm not sure how anyone will do it with a motor and transmission in it. But yeah, it's gonna be a pain. And for anyone that says that there's not a bushing problem, I think this car legitimately only has, let's see, 1,300 miles on it. Granted, those are mostly race miles, but I mean, that bushing is shot. So we'll get some upgraded ones in there and we'll go from there. Earlier, said I wished it was nicer outside so I could wash this thing out. Well, I decided to use my brain a little bit, and I have my vacuum, so I'm just gonna vacuum out all the garbage in here. Is it probably good for my vacuum? No, but it's a Harbor Freight vacuum. Like, it can't hurt it. So, just gonna make sure I don't have any, oh, see, these are those pesky secondary, the stupid bushings for the secondary clutch cover where it mounts in. Don't lose these. They're impossible to find. So yeah, I'm just gonna come in here, maybe grab a brush or something, try and knock all this garbage off of here, and yeah, just get this cleaned up. Is it life-changingly different clean? Not at all. But is it better now that I don't have to worry about as much debris? Absolutely. And for the 5 minutes it took, I think it's gonna help me a lot in the long run. So yeah. Well, I got the axle out. I didn't record it because I was trying to hustle to get done before bedtime with my son. But here's a brief overview. Pulled the caliper off. Pulled the axle nut off. Most people don't know, but the left side rear axle is actually left-hand thread. Just something weird that Kawasaki did. But this bottom radius rod bolt fought me really hard for some reason. Had to get out the big 1/2-inch impact, which is fine. But I will tell you this. I pulled the axle shaft out, which left the cup in there because it was broken. And I took a pry bar and I just put it right behind here, and this axle cup just popped out. I mean, and if you've ever seen KRX horror stories of the transmissions, you'll know how bad it can get. And the reason I think that happened is last time I, wrecked this car, the axle shaft, I had to replace I had to replace a whole bunch of stuff. I'll show a photo of that now. Good.
Yeah, Michael gets I don't know if it's gonna come out. It's stuck now.
So last time I put this all back together with the transmission and whatnot, I made sure to put some really good waterproof grease in here. And as you can see, it's still, I cleaned it out already, which probably shouldn't have done that so I could show you. But I put a lot of waterproof grease in there and made sure that everything was properly greased up. and this is axle grease from the boot, but whatever. But made sure it was properly greased up. Not enough, not too much to where this clip couldn't clip. I made sure it was fully seated, but I just put a good waterproof grease on there. And from the factory, this is pretty dry. And what happens then, you get water, sand, dirt in there, and it rusts up, and then this seizes, and then it just becomes a horror story. So if you have a new KRX or you're working on your KRX, just when you pull your axles, make sure you put a good grease on there. I mean, just a good grease is going to save you a lot of pain. And even the hour and a half, you know, if it takes you an hour to pull both axles, you know, if it's your first time, it's definitely even worth it just because of how much of a pain it is to do.